And a very good Monday morning to you on the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm George Spencer, joined on what looks to be a busy day by attorneys Bob Hille and Kenneth Montgomery. Great to have both of you here with us. It's going to be a lot to monitor today, guys. And there you hear it, the comments at the end of this trial from Prosecutor Eddie Chase there in that Georgia courtroom in this foster parents trial that we've been following for some time now. I'm joined again this morning by attorneys Bob Hille and Kenneth Montgomery. Guys, we've kind of followed every development in this case really since it started. It seems like the point that prosecutor was trying to hammer home to the jury at the end of this trial when he was speaking in those clips on Friday was this idea that the defense's allegation that the Heimlich maneuver, i.e. mom trying to save this little girl's life from the chicken she was supposedly choking on, that Heimlich maneuver wouldn't have caused the injuries that they ended up finding on this little girl's body. Bob, I'll start with you and just wonder, how's this landing if you're sitting in that jury? How would you be feeling if you're an attorney on the prosecution side at this point?
Well, obviously the difficult job here for the jurors was that history of abuse, which there doesn't really seem to be a question about. What caused this incident? Or was there really a choking incident unrelated to that history of abuse and then the mother just misapplied? But the statement there from the prosecutor, I think, honing in on the evidence that you only had one instance of a lacerated pancreas in the history of using a Heimlich maneuver, and that child survived, sort of really underscores his attempt to discredit the defense.
Yeah, is that your take on it as well, Kenneth? That this is discrediting the defense here through really getting into the medical pieces of this. Is that working from your perspective?
If I'm the prosecutor, and I think what this prosecutor is doing, and I agree what was just said, is he's relying on the objective, credible scientific evidence, which is that autopsy. And essentially for a group of jurors, whether they are well-versed in medical terms or not, could these injuries have been caused in the manner in which the defendants are saying they're caused? And,
yeah, so really, Kenneth, getting to the bottom of that question of medically, could it have occurred the way that the defense is trying to lay it out? Is that's
actually what I would be focusing on, and I think what the prosecutor's also tying in is this calculating defense by the defendants. One who's a law student who used to be an intern at the district attorney's office, so that may explain what their reasoning is how this injury was caused, going into intent and knowing that what they did was wrong and that these injuries were caused by some other
yeah, it's way. It's a lot to keep track of in this courtroom, and certainly that piece that you just heard there is not the only thing that prosecutors said as they sort of made the summation of their case for the jury. They also honed in on inconsistencies in the defense's account, and we want to take you to listen to that piece of their summation right now. And there you have it, the closing arguments from the defense attorney Corinne Mull there, trying to sow obviously some doubt in this case, joined by attorneys Bob Hille and Kenneth Montgomery. Guys, we've been following this. You heard that defense attorney there very clearly going to this angle of creating some doubt about what exactly unfolded, what the mother knew medically about performing a Heimlich maneuver, trying to perform CPR. She said there's nothing simple and clear about the medical information in this case. Bob, what's your take?
Well, I think she's doing a great job of really going the only route she can. The jury's going to struggle with the medicals here, and she's saying, you know, number one, that the state and the authorities had a mission to convict. It was their anger that drove this, not her issues there. She also talks about how the evidence in the case shows she doesn't have any knowledge of CPR or the Heimlich, and that her efforts resulted in the injury because they were desperate efforts to save the child, not to harm the child.
I agree. I think she has a limited defense. And it's a way to kind of distract in one regard from the strongest evidence against them, which is the autopsy and the medical report. And it seems as though the defense is also throwing in a political angle, saying that this city's administration or the authority that was responsible for watching these children, it's ultimately somehow their fault. I think it's a tough sell, considering how the evidence has gone into the case.
Yeah, the defense really, they crossed a lot of territory even in that brief little clip we heard there, because you're right, Kenneth, at the beginning they mentioned that, there was a lot at stake in this case. I mean, with the Department of Children and Families, Jennifer's political background, money at stake. Is it going to be effective in your mind at sowing the level of doubt they need?
It depends on who's sitting on that jury. And it depends on, if this case may simply boil down to the battle of experts. Whose expert is most credible, and whose story or narrative is most credible.
And Bob, when it comes down to battles of experts and really hard information versus perhaps more what you might call more accessible witnesses, kind of regular Joe type witnesses, how did juries do with that in your experience? I mean, is that a tough kind of road for them to get down when they really have to get in the weeds of medical intricacies?
Well, this is the kind of case where it's really important. They are going to recognize that these experts really may have a bias when they're brought into the courtroom, but they're going to look beyond that bias and that opinion to see who makes more sense in terms of what they're given. And again, beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't mean beyond all doubt.
Any doubt, yeah.
And so in a lot of these cases, there are convictions because the jurors really remove any other reasonable alternative here. Not every alternative, but every reasonable alternative.
Reasonable alternative. So that's what it's going to be getting down to. And we're going to return to that courtroom right now, because actually there was even more of that closing that was important to this case, including portions about the defense, portions in which the defense attorney talked about that Heimlich maneuver that the mother was supposedly performing on little Layla at around the time that she died, supposedly as Layla was choking on chicken. Let's take a listen to what the defense had to say about that. There you have it. Powerful closing arguments from that defense attorney there, making some rather bold claims. Attorney Bob Hille, I want to start with you. I mean, is this at all risky when you think about it's quite a claim to say, quote, they're lying about Jennifer, they're lying about Joseph, and then even bring in the sister of the little girl who died, kind of questioning the validity of what she said. What's your take?
It's a very risky thing. It's always great to focus on inconsistencies, but let the jury conclude if somebody's lying. You can show that without having to say they're a liar. If you're going to say they're a liar, there better be no question about that, because what it can look like then is that you're desperate, and it can also look like you're trying to bring them into a direction that's not supported by the evidence. And
Kenneth, I mean, there's also this sort of other thread that this defense attorney brought up very clearly, that, oh, everybody's saying it's abuse now. Why didn't they say it at the time? That is perhaps a more common sense type approach.
That is, and that's again tying into the laying the blame on this city administration that's responsible for watching these two little girls. I think I agree with Bob, is absolutely risky. You don't want to appear as a defense attorney to be throwing everything against the wall. And you also don't want to appear to offend the common sense of a group of jurors and ostracize them by going after another abuse victim. I think that's risky, and I think what's really interesting, and the jurors won't have any say on this, is that there's one defense attorney, two defendants. Normally, that's something that you want to avoid because of conflict of interest and duties owed to your particular client. And obviously, the prosecution wouldn't be able to talk about this, but I'm sure that's going through one of those jurors' mind, is why does this husband and wife team have one lawyer, and why have neither of them told their story if this was an innocent?
And there are real issues between the two of them, too.
Yes, there are.
Lots, as we've heard pieces of, lots to dissect here, and this is, of course, just one of the three big cases we are following today here on the Law and Crime Network. We are live in 3 courtrooms right now and awaiting jury deliberations to begin in the Rosenbaum case. We'll be tracking it all. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. And there you see it. We are now officially in verdict watch in the state of Georgia against Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum, the foster parents accused in the death of their own 2-year-old foster child, Layla. Just within the past 10 minutes or so, the jury down there in Georgia has in fact begun their deliberations in this case. They saw closing arguments for the case on Friday and also were instructed by the judge on how to proceed with their deliberations. So we can tell you we are now officially in verdict watch. Their deliberations are now underway in the Rosenbaum case. Of course, the moment anything happens, we will bring that to you live here on Law and Crime. But right now, we want to go back to some of the most critical testimony that they are likely considering at this very moment. And that includes a defense witness, Dr. Chris Sperry, and his assessment of what happened to little Layla. Let's take a listen. That is the defense witness, Dr. Chris Sperry, of course, painting a very different picture about exactly how little Layla died. In the first part of that clip, we actually heard him asked, did you come to a conclusion about how Layla Daniel sustained her injuries? And he talked about a, quote, multiplicity of injuries, including problems, injuries to her pancreas that could have been caused, he said, by the, quote, intense efforts to try to save the child's life. Joined again this half hour by attorneys Bob Hille and Kenneth Montgomery. And Bob, we'll start with you there. Kind of your read on this forensic pathologist getting up there and sowing more of that doubt that they're looking for in terms of how exactly this little girl came to her demise.
Well, I think he laid the facts out to call into question the credibility of the argument from the state that it happened as a result of intended abuse. But the first question I had is this the best guy they could get? He's like a country doctor, and he's sort of all over the place in his explanation. Now, perhaps, you know, that will work, but, you know, he didn't really give you a lot of confidence in how he approached the investigation here.
Yeah, and Kenneth, we heard him, you know, there was this line during his testimony that you know, his perception was, this is what he's, you know, saying to the jury, was that mom started trying to dislodge that piece of chicken in little Layla's mouth, and that's, you know, couldn't dislodge it, couldn't try to save her life. That's perhaps how these injuries came about.
I think this is a dangerous witness for the defense. I think it's very risky to call them, and as Bob stated, I don't know if this was the best person to lay this out. And when just the brief moment that I was listening and watching his testimony in the beginning, I couldn't quite tell if he was a defense witness or not. The way he came off and what he's talking about, and ultimately, you have these injuries that you have to explain, and these young girls, these innocent girls, they're under the supervision of two people.
And I want to get back to that, sort of zooming back out a little bit, guys, because if you think about children sustaining injuries, you're both attorneys, I've got to imagine it's very easy for a jury to get to, these are your children, in this case your foster children, you're responsible for their well-being. I mean, that seems like the most natural connection that a regular jury member might make.
And the jury, you know, jurors present all types of cultural background, life experiences, issues. This is one thing that ties all the jurors together, no matter what their race, their background, their class is. It's some two harmless children and what happened to them. And I think it's very risky, and like Bob said, I don't know if this was the best witness to bring home that this was a innocent, because you're essentially arguing this was a mistake. That's what you're arguing, because even in the defense argument, you're not saying she caused these injuries herself. You're saying she was choking.
Trying to save this little girl.
We did this, and that explains
we did it wrong.
That.
Yes, exactly. Well, obviously a lot to watch as we are now officially in verdict watch in this Rosenbaum case out of Georgia. The jury is deliberating right now as we speak. The moment anything happens, we will bring it to you. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We're coming back after a break.